We thought we were alone in the woods, until someone mimicked my wife's voice. There's something about the deep woods that makes you feel truly alone. No cell service, no roads, just endless trees stretching into the unknown. My wife, Sarah, and I had been looking forward to this camping trip for weeks. A weekend away from the chaos of life, just the two of us disconnected from the world. We chose a remote spot deep in the Appalachian Mountains, far from the main trails. We hiked in about 5 miles, off the beaten path, and set up camp near a small clearing. By the time we pitched our tent and got a fire going, the sky was fading into soft orange and pink hues. The first night was perfect, quiet, peaceful. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. We drank a couple of beers, told stories, and laughed, feeling like we had the entire forest to ourselves. But by the second night, that peaceful feeling was gone. It started subtly, little things that didn't make sense. As the sun was setting, I left Sarah at the campsite to gather some firewood. I wandered about 50 yards into the woods when I heard it, soft humming. It was familiar, almost soothing, like a tune Sarah often hummed when she was lost in thought. "Sarah," I called out. No response. The humming stopped. I felt a strange prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Something about the silence felt wrong. The kind of silence that doesn't belong in the woods, where there should be the rustling of leaves, the chirping of insects. But there was nothing. I hurried back to camp, trying to shake the unease. Sarah was exactly where I had left her, sitting by the fire, flipping through her book. "Hey," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Were you just humming?" She looked up confused. "No, why?" I hesitated. "I swear I heard you humming in the woods." Sarah furrowed her brow, but shrugged. "Maybe you imagined it? Sound carries weird out here." I nodded, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I didn't imagine it. I knew what I heard. Later that night, after Sarah had gone to bed, I stayed by the fire a little longer, letting the warmth sink into my bones before turning in. The woods around me felt heavier, darker than before. That's when I heard it. "Hey, come here for a second." My blood ran cold. It was Sarah's voice, but it wasn't coming from the tent. It was coming from the woods. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly turned my head toward the tree line. My breath hitched in my throat. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows, but I couldn't see anything past the darkness beyond the clearing. "Sarah," I called out barely above a whisper. The voice came again, closer this time. "Come here. I need you." The way it spoke, it was Sarah's voice, but something about it was wrong. The tone was too flat, too hollow, as if someone was playing a recording of her voice through broken speakers. I swallowed hard, gripping the hatchet we had brought for chopping wood. My heart pounded in my ears. Then I heard the zipper of the tent slowly slide open behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Sarah was still inside, sitting up groggy and confused. "What are you doing?" she mumbled sleepily. I stared at her. My stomach twisted, if Sarah was in the tent. Then who the hell was calling me from the woods? I grabbed her arm, whispering, "Sarah, wake up. Someone's out there." She blinked, trying to shake off sleep, but then it called again. "Come here. I need you." Sarah gasped, slapping a hand over her mouth. We both sat frozen, listening. Then, from the trees, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching over leaves, getting closer. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a laughter. But not just any laughter. It was Sarah's laugh. Identical. Perfectly mimicked. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened so hard it hurt. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing. I had never felt fear like this before. Raw, primal. Then something stepped out from the trees. It stood just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the dim firelight. My breath hitched. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs too long. But its face, God, its face was wrong. It looked human, but distorted, stretched, like someone had tried to recreate a person from memory and failed. And then, in Sarah's voice, it whispered, "Let me in." Sarah let out a strangled sob. I yanked her back toward the tent, fumbling for the knife in our pack with shaking hands. The thing tilted its head at an unnatural angle, like a curious animal. Its mouth opened, too wide, and let out that same broken laughter. Then it took a step closer. My brain screamed, "Run." I grabbed Sarah's hand, unzipped the tent, and threw ourselves inside, yanking the flap shut. I knew it was pointless. A thin layer of fabric wouldn't stop it. But in that moment, it was all I could do. Outside, the footsteps circled our tent. Slow, careful. Then a whisper right outside the fabric. "Let me in." I pressed a hand over Sarah's mouth to keep her from making a sound. We sat there, paralyzed, listening as whatever that thing was waited. Then nothing. Minutes passed, maybe hours. We stayed frozen, not daring to breathe. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I don't even remember falling asleep. When I woke up, daylight was pouring through the fabric of the tent. I hesitated, then slowly unzipped the flap. The clearing was empty, but the ground outside was covered in footprints, circling our tent, over and over. We packed up and left within minutes, never looking back. To this day, I don't know what we encountered out there, but sometimes in the dead of night, Sarah will wake up in a cold sweat, swearing she hears something outside our window. A whisper, her own voice. "Let me in." Story 2. The Note in the Woods. There's nothing like a quiet camping trip to escape the stress of daily life. At least, that's what Emily and I thought when we planned a weekend getaway deep in the woods. No distractions, no phones, just us, a tent, and the stars. We had picked a secluded camping spot, miles from the nearest road. The air smelled like pine, and the only sound were the rustling leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. It felt peaceful, almost unreal. That first night, we sat by the fire, toasting marshmallows, sharing stories, and laughing about how soft we had become living in the city. "It's kind of nice out here," Emily said, leaning into me. "No emails, no deadlines. Just us." I smiled and pulled her closer, watching the flames flicker against the darkness. "Yeah, just us." Or so we thought. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping and the soft morning breeze rustling the tent. Emily was already up, moving around outside. "I'm going to get some firewood," she called. "Be right back." Still half asleep, I mumbled something and shut my eyes again. But a few minutes later, I heard her call my name. This time, her voice sounded off. I crawled out of the tent, rubbing my eyes, and found her standing near a large, moss-covered boulder. Her face was pale. In her hands was a crumpled piece of paper. "You need to see this," she whispered. I took the note from her and felt an immediate chill as I read the messy, uneven handwriting. "You shouldn't be here. Leave before it gets dark." I looked around, suddenly feeling exposed. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction. The morning air felt colder. "Where did you find this?" I asked. Emily pointed to the rock beside her. "It was just sitting there. It wasn't here last night." I swear, a wave of unease settled over me. My logical mind told me it was probably a prank. Maybe some kids messing around. Maybe an old note someone had left behind. But my gut told me something else. Something was wrong. "We should go," Emily said. "I don't like this." I hesitated. The thought of packing up and hiking back so soon felt ridiculous. We had just gotten here. "It's probably nothing," I said. "Just someone trying to scare campers." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Still, for the rest of the day, the feeling never left. We tried to enjoy ourselves, hiking, fishing, even just sitting by the water, but every so often I caught Emily glancing over her shoulder. And honestly, I was doing the same. That night, the woods felt different. We were sitting by the fire, trying to shake off the feeling of unease when we heard it. A twig snapping, not in the distance, close. We both froze, staring into the darkness beyond the fire's glow. The night was deathly silent. No wind, no insects, just silence. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered. I nodded, slowly reaching for the flashlight. My heart was pounding as I clicked it on and shined it toward the trees. Nothing, just shadows. "Maybe it was a deer," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. We sat there listening, but the sound didn't come again. After a while, we convinced ourselves it was just our imagination. We put out the fire and crawled into the tent, but sleep didn't come easy. Every rustling leaf, every distant hoot of an owl made my skin crawl. Then, Around 3 a.m., I heard again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling our tent. My breath caught in my throat. I turned to Emily, but she was already awake, eyes wide with fear. I grabbed the flashlight with shaking hands and unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees, but there was nothing there. Then the sound stopped, just like that, like whoever or whatever was out there knew we were listening. We sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, barely breathing. The forest had gone completely silent again. Then Emily whispered, "We need to go." I wanted to agree. Every instinct was screaming at me to run. But it was the middle of the night, and the idea of hiking back through the woods in complete darkness felt just as terrifying. "We'll leave first thing in the morning," I promised. As soon as the sun comes up, Emily didn't argue. She just curled up next to me, clutching my arm, and we stayed like that until the first rays of light crept through the tent. We wasted no time packing up. The uneasy feeling from the night before hadn't faded, and neither of us wanted to stay another minute. As I rolled up my sleeping bag, I turned to grab my backpack and froze. Pinned to the tree right behind our tent was another note. It hadn't been there the night before. With trembling hands, I pulled it down and unfolded it. "You stayed too long." My stomach dropped. "Emily," I croaked, barely able to get the words out. "We need to go. Now." We grabbed our things and ran. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. We just ran until we reached the car, breathless and shaking. The moment we locked the doors and sped away, we finally exhaled. Only when we were miles away did I dare to speak. "Who the hell was that?" Emily didn't answer. She just stared out the window, gripping her seatbelt like it was the only thing keeping her together. We never found out who or what left the notes. There were no other campers around. No missing person reports. No signs of life except us. But the scariest part? The thing that still haunts me to this day? As we were speeding down the empty road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a second, I swore I saw something standing at the edge of the trees, watching us leave, and it wasn't moving.